Good evening and welcome to another Terroir Talk. Tonight I'm with winemaker Karim Mussi from the Uco Valley, and he's streaming straight from Mendoza. Hopefully he will join us very soon. And he's going to be presenting his wines from Bodega Alandes, which is an excellent project blending different regions in the Uco Valley. So he's going to give us the complete rundown on these different terroirs of the Uco Valley and talk about, in particular, his love of the kind of Bordeaux-inspired blends. And we're going to talk a bit about the inspiration for this portfolio of excellent wines. So I'm just going to see if I can invite Karim in to join us. I hope it will work nicely. This is all part of the launch run-up to the South America Wine Guide, which will be coming up. Good evening.
This is the third time that we are trying, so I hope we can really, it's going to work okay now.
It is, third time lucky, that's what happens. So I wanted to look at the Uco Valley and really focus in on the top terroirs that you work with. Valley. So can you tell me from the beginning about your introduction to wine and how you started working in wine?
I'm going to move, maybe it's my connection, sorry for that.
It's okay.
I don't know what is happening specifically today. So I'm going to move, or maybe I can do a quick visit to the winery. There's a lot of people connected that they would love to see how Argentina is looking now. So let me show you. I'm here with Fernando.
Hello, Fernando.
He works on the commercial area. And this is our tasting room. And now, finally, we are receiving some tourism and customers here.
Excellent. How exciting.
¿Cómo andan, chicos? ¿Todo bien? Estamos transmitiendo para una gente amiga. Permiso. Say hello to Amanda.
Hello. Hi, Amanda. How are you doing?
Very well. How are you? How exciting today. And this is in Maipo.
Yes, this is in Maipo. I don't know if people know that you lived here before, so.
I know I still live.
Oh, yes.
The pandemic. I still live in Mendoza.
Well, this is the Alandes winery, where we make the wines that you are showing now. And well, this is the typical sunny day from our fall. We're starting our autumn, so it's a beautiful day.
It looks
We're
wonderful.
not harvesting today, but it's a beautiful day. It's not extremely warm like in summer, and not extremely cold like but it's very enjoyable today.
When did you start harvesting?
Say again?
When did you start harvesting?
We start harvesting very late in February, especially for the whites, that we have to wait a little bit more to get the proper ripeness. And right now we already finished with all the Malbecs. I'm waiting for the rest of the varieties, especially the Cabs that are very delayed on the ripeness moment.
Okay. Super. So it's a slight, I know, early. This one.
Sorry, say again?
Is this a normal Mendoza or?
No, it's completely unusual. As you know, here we have a very continental weather, so I'm going to find the best part of the place. We have a very continental weather here, and we normally don't have a lot of rain in that part of the season, so we are dealing with that. And I don't know if we can blame the the climate change, but it's something that we have to adapt to the current circumstances, like we had last year. For example, the previous vintage was extremely warm, no rain at all, so all the ripeness moment came earlier, and all the varietals together. We didn't have the situation that we're experimenting right now, that we have a lot of time difference between one part of the one varietals and the others, especially for the Malbecs that came earlier this year. So it's a permanent job of keeping the eye on the moment that we consider is the best moment, or we should not continue waiting to bring the fruit to the winery.
Okay, super. And I imagine that quite complicated for you and in terms of blending, because are you co-fermenting Alandes, or are they being fermented separately?
No, for the Alandes Paradox, both Paradox, the white and red, they are fermented separately. In this case, for this classic Bordeaux style, we prefer to make it very orthodox, very French, and compared with other varietals that we normally co-ferment, here we prefer to keep it separately and take the final decisions at the very end, right before the bottling.
Excellent, interesting. And I want to before we kind of jump into tasting the wines and talking about specific wines, I want to ask you about your story and your history in wine and how you started. Why did you become a winemaker? I know your father and family are involved, so can you tell us about your introduction to wine?
Well, it's I don't know if it's a very original story, but I think I started my father company. He was a person that was already part of the wine business, but only on the commercial side. He was specialized to trade or export wine commodities. But I started that maybe as a consumer. I think the passion or the interest of wine came to me like you or many other people that had a different education, but at the end we are working all together. So that means that apparently we live in separate worlds, but we merge into the same passion or into the same interest after a few years that it takes you to discover your passion or how you want to live, because especially in this particular business, it's a lifestyle. So you cannot have a regular job or normal duties from 9 to 5. You have a very particular and heterodox lifestyle that is related with the farming, with the winemaking, with the business itself, especially traveling around the world to sell the wine, to improve your education. So it's a very complex lifestyle, but extremely enjoyable.
Absolutely. I imagine, especially during harvest, you must be full time for 4 months. No weekends from January to March or May.
Yes, but during harvest, in the same day, yesterday, for example, I started my day at 7:30 and I arrived home at 9:30 after, I don't know, I start walking 3 vineyards to decide some picking moments, checking analysis, tasting wines, tasting the wines that we are currently fermenting, and I finish my day in a vineyard. It was after the sunset, it was almost dark when I left the place, and that means that you have to be very sharp on how you spend your time and how do you want to manage these specific decisions that theoretically are going to help us to make a better wine.
Excellent, super. And you certainly do make excellent wines, and I can't wait to taste them. I'm really excited to start with your white wine. because this for me is one of the most exciting white wines in Argentina in the last couple of years. I love this, as you know. So I want to kind of ask, before we kind of taste it, tell me about your inspiration for Paradu, because these, or the whole brand, Alandes, actually. What was your kind of inspiration in starting it?
Well, for the people that they don't know our projects, I started 22 years ago in La Consulta, a specific appellation in the Uco Valley, that it was very well known for the locals, but not for the market, despite many of the fruit used to the best of the icon wines of many local wineries came from. So I established Alto Cedro Winery in 1999 as a terroir-driven winery, where we use 100% fruit from La Consulta, fermented, aged, and bottled at the property. So it doesn't sound very original for other regions or appellations, but 22 years ago, it was a very original idea or concept or strategy for Argentina. So I established myself in La Consulta. I spent all my efforts to put La Consulta on the map, proving that beautiful appellation where it had those patrimony vineyards or those pre-phylloxera old vines, original rootstocks, that permit us to travel on the time to discover Argentina 100 years ago. So Argentina looks like a new world country, but actually we are very old, classic, old world country, especially for our European, French education and European immigration, mostly Italians here in Argentina. So later I copied myself, moving to Cafayate, another great paradise, where I started making wine in 2011. And that also permitted me to continue doing wines from a specific terroir. So Abras Winery, it's also a terroir-driven operation. And years later, when we bought this property, I decided to change that strategy and put it in the same portfolio under the Karim Mussi winemaker umbrella brand, but doing something completely different. So Alandes came on board as a concept of doing wines along the Andes. As you know, the Andes Mountains, it's a huge formation that crosses almost the whole continent, but specifically here in Argentina, split the territory in two countries, but also in two different wine regions. The west side, or the left side of the Andes, where Chile is located, it's a very unique territory, very thin and long from very north to the very south, with a lot of ocean influence from the Pacific. Well, here on the right side of the Andes, it's completely dry. We live and we work in high mountain deserts. Mendoza is a huge desert where only 5% of the total surface is planted. So that permits us to develop the territory or discover the territory, planting almost in 9 different provinces or states, from the very south in Patagonia to the very north in the Calchaquí Valley. So the Alandes concept permits us to, Alandes stands for along the Andes, so the concept is to do wines along the Andes, and that permits us to develop something completely different from the things that we had before. So when we had the opportunity to, with that blank paper, that white paper, completely empty, about what Alandes is going to be in the future, I was thinking, compared with other colleagues or winemakers that were exploring the limits of the winemaking, the limits of our territory here, the new regions. I thought that I already had my experience in La Consulta, so I said maybe the most disruptive thing or the most disruptive wine that we can make, it's embracing the most classic flavors. So it's returning to the basis, returning to the very classic. So both paradox, the first two labels from the first two wines from Alandes was almost a joke about the French paradox or making wine here in Argentina under this concept. So I always like to give the example of the paradox wines are apparently a very classic Bordeaux style, but it's like somebody invited us to a party full of hipsters, and we arrived to the party dressed with a blue jacket, gray pants, and brown shoes. So all the hipsters were shocked about how well dressed we were. So I think both paradox are a blue jacket, gray pants, and brown shoes, classic Bordeaux style from Argentina.
Absolutely. I think that's a really nice anecdote and an interesting way of talking about La Consulta. So when you started there in 1999 with Alto Cedro, La Consulta, to put it in context for anyone that doesn't know the Uco Valley, is part of the southern part of the Uco Valley, so San Carlos. Can you explain why you went to La Consulta and what is special about the terroir there? What makes it unique?
Well, my family already had a property there. They bought land in the 80s. It was very inexpensive because after one of our many crises here in Argentina, we ripe out a lot of vineyards, almost 40,000 hectares in the whole province. So I found in La Consulta one of the few patrimony vineyards that were still alive. So I thought that maybe that was the best shortcut. I'm talking about, I don't like shortcuts in life, but maybe that was a good shortcut to understand better how to make wines with using specifically those grapes. So I established myself in La Consulta. I refurbished a very old winery built by the British many years ago that they used to work for the British Train Company. So it was a beautiful building that I loved, a great ceiling with pine trees, bamboo ceiling, mud bricks, stones. So talking about green buildings and low intervention, the original winemakers had concepts about energy or saving energy or natural winemaking much more well developed than the ones that we have here today. But I love that building. I spent a lot of time and money to refurbish, especially to put it, take advantage of the concrete tanks. The concrete tanks are, for me, one of the most important tools that we have at that moment to implement a different kind of fermentations, natural fermentations, 100% with indigenous yeast, and taking advantage of the temperature insulation from the concrete, but also from the shape. While in a regular stainless steel tank, you have this shape where the surface contact between the skin and the cap and the juice is determined by the diameter of the cylinder or the tank. In a concrete tank, you have a shape like this one. So you have the tanks are longer, wider, and very shallow. So that permits us to have a very thin cap with a lot of skins in contact with the juice. So we can have a very spontaneous extraction of the phenols, not abusing of any mechanical or chemical tool. So that was the heart of my theory or my winemaking dogmas 22 years ago when I was a very skinny guy with 30 kilos less. So completely inexperienced, but at least trying to make something different, but using the quality or the concepts that I found in that specific winery. So we adapt the cutting edge technology, art of technology. So all our wineries are gravity fed, no pipes, no piping, a lot of energy saving, and also taking care of the skins. We work with whole berry fermentation for all our wines. And that permits us to develop a very specific style for our wines. So Alandes came like something that permits us to apparently develop a new concept of Alto Cedro, but they are part of the same evolution and learning process that I started 22 years ago. And La Consulta is a paradise where the vines are at the Disneyland of the vineyard growing conditions, because the efficiency of phenol concentration that they can reach at that point are almost the higher phenol concentration that you can reach in Argentina, but with very soft, elegant tannins. So it's not about only quantity, it's also about the quality of tannins that we can reach there. And something that nobody pay attention is the material, those patrimony vineyards that we found there that were developed by the Italians. La Consulta is a very Italian town. It's a very Italian place where all the growers are Italian. So, and you know, the Italians came from another planet to conquer the world through the wine and food. So they are obsessive farmers that kept that original material for more than 5 generations. So the beauty of La Consulta is also based on the fruit that we can get from those patrimony vineyards.
Excellent. And how old are some of your vines in La Consulta?
We work from very young vineyards of, I don't know, 5 years old, the youngest, to more than 100-year-old, the oldest.
Excellent. Amazing. I always think that's so interesting because so many people think the Uco Valley is a new wine region, but it's actually a very historic wine region with great heritage too. So let's talk about your Paradou Blanc and the classic Bordeaux varieties of Semillon and Sauvignon. Can you tell us a bit about the history of Semillon in Argentina? Because it's quite an important one, I think.
Yes. When I start my, I put it, use it Coravan. The bottle is closed.
Oh dear, well I have some.
Sorry. It's not my best day today.
Grams either.
I will leave the bottle here. The Semillon, it's one of the 3 most well-adapted varietals in the region, specifically in La Consulta. The National Agricultural Institute, the one that you know, the INTA, did in the 80s a research along the country, around the country, but specifically from all the Andean provinces, from Salta to Patagonia to Rio Negro, and they discovered some traditional cepage that got more well adapted in certain appellations. Most of those appellations had only one varietal attached or detected, while La Consulta was the only one with 3 varietals, Tempranillo and Malbec in reds and Semillon in whites. So another shortcut for me was to start making wine and learning from those 3 specific varietals, Tempranillo, Malbec, and Semillon. We have it's a mass selection of something that we call yellow Semillon. It's a very thick skin, dark yellow cluster that it's more resistant to botrytis or any other fungus or disease. So we can pick it later, not as a regular white wine, but mostly for a Reserva white wine. So that permits us to reach a very classic flavor with a very rich structure, and also to make wines that can age very well in the barrel, and they can also age very well in the bottle after the wine is ready.
Excellent. And tell me about the winemaking, because this is a very rich and complex, quite leesy wine, I would describe it as. Can you tell me a bit about the kind of winemaking in terms of how long you leave it in contact and how long you mature it in barrel?
Yes, we have a classic fermentation in barrels, both Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc. Normally, depending the yields, but always sourcing the fruit from the same vineyard, the blend is 2/3 or 66% of Semillon and 1/3 of Sauvignon Blanc. For me, it's the ideal blend, despite it can slightly change from one vintage to another. But the fermentation happens in barrels. We have a classic basket pressing, like the one that you have here is a basket press.
Uh-huh.
So we take the juice from there and we ferment it with indigenous yeast. And after that, when the fermentation finish, we stir the lees, or we do the classic batonnage, depending the year, 1, 2, or even 3 times per day. This year we are stirring the lees 2 times per day. This is something very specific that we have to taste and check every day. But because we don't have a baton this is an internal joke, but we don't have a baton in Argentina, or nobody speaks French at the winery. We have a palito and a stick, so we do a palitage instead of a batonnage. So we normally do 2 palitages per day, and then they age a year in barrels. But for me, it's not enough time to reach this style. So I start blending. So any paradox is vintage. So to start using older wine that age longer, every year I have to empty the barrels to bring new wine. For the people that they don't know, the barrels that you use for white wines, you have to continue using strictly for white wines. So I have to empty the barrels to receive the new juice from the next year. But for the final blend, I put together 2, 3, or even 4 different vintages that I continue saving in bigger cask called tonneau. That's a 5-liter container, a 500-liter barrel, or 500-liter container, oak container, that permit to age slower and keep the flavor and the freshness of the previous vintages. So all the paradox are multi-vintage, multi-appellation, and multi-varietal.
Excellent. I love it. I think it's very creative and interesting as a concept, and very traditional, really. Do you think that the non-vintage blends will become more consistent over time? Do you think we'll see... My question is, with a vintage wine, you see differences of the harvest. Do you think with your non-vintage that you will see a more consistent style across the board?
I think that personally I like vintage variation. I enjoy vintage variation as a winemaker, but mostly as a consumer. But here, specifically in Argentina, thanks to our continental weather, we don't have the vintage variation that you have in Europe, for example, or in Bordeaux. So sometimes if you give liberty or freedom to the winemakers to develop the best blend possible, or the best wine possible to put in the bottle, not attached to a very strict law that says that the wine has to be 100% from a single vintage, it will permit to many wineries to develop something new. I would love to continue seeing more non-vintage wines, especially for those that deserve to be combined, or you can have a certain benefit of putting 2 or 3 vintages together, especially for the white wines that can age longer, and you can appreciate the benefit or the beauty of having a white Reserva wine.
Excellent. Yeah, and we've got some really nice comments about people who love this wine. So I'll show it one more time. And this is definitely one I think that you can age for many years to come. So this is your vintage on release at the moment is about the 3rd vintage.
The 4th is already bottled. This one is the 4th edition.
Okay.
The one that I have here is the 4th edition. Maybe you in England, you have the previous one.
So far it's a blend of 4 vintages, but as time goes on, it'll be more and more vintages.
Yes, I always keep wines from older vintages, and I put it together. I continue. It's like a Solera system.
Perfect.
I continue bringing older wines especially to maintain and to keep that complexity from a wine that aged longer than 12 months.
Super. Wonderful. All right. Well, I think we should move on to your Paradou blend Tinto.
Yes, sure. Okay.
And so we're really embracing traditional Bordeaux variety. all 5 of them, in fact. So Malbec, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, and Petit Verdot. Can you tell me a bit about why you decided to pick these varieties and what you like about them all individually?
It was started as an internal joke of the blue jacket, gray pants, and brown shoes. I think putting the 5, the main five Bordeaux varietals will help us to share this joke with other people. But behind that joke, we really wanted to demonstrate ourselves about how we can reach or keep the elegance of the Bordeaux style that we like. I don't have any specific preference of the new world versus the old world. I love both sides. I don't like any classification. I find many new world style wines in Europe, and here in Argentina you can find a lot of old world style wines. But I always try to build our wines above 3 columns: complexity or elegance, finesse, freshness, and balance. And if it is possible, the aging capacity could be a 4th column. But the big 5 varietals, Malbec, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, and Petit Verdot, put it together will always work very well. They will get along very well, and there's no any conflict like when we use other varietals like Tempranillo, Pinot Noir, or Syrah. So here for using those 5, we were able to continue analyzing the concept of making the perfect blend or the best blend possible, that knowing that it doesn't exist. That it doesn't exist the best wine in the world. Could be the best wine for you or 100-point wine for somebody else, but the perfect wine itself, it doesn't exist. It's an appreciation of beauty that is different between you and the rest of the world. So knowing that the perfect world doesn't exist, at least we try to reach something similar using those 5 varietals, making jokes about the French paradox. The French paradox that explain how the French people or the Mediterranean diet that was improved by the regular consumption of red wines. It's also a paradox itself, and very similar to the paradox that Winston Churchill explained after the Second World War, talking about the Russians. So,
what was that paradox? Enlighten me.
Well, I don't want to talk nothing against the Russians. Maybe I will be poisoned by somebody in the next few days. But they consider the Russians, after they won and they split the war after the Second World War, that they were a paradox or they were a big problem wrapped in a paradox, something like that. So the paradox as a concept, it's like a metaphoric idea of something impossible that, at least for dumb people like me, it's worth it to fight for. So we try to make the best blend possible, knowing that it was an impossible goal, but at least we enjoy the trial or the effort to do it. So we always try it has a triple selection, blind selection of vintages, varietals, and lots. So every time we make the new paradox, we choose 5 varietals that we don't know where they are coming from which vintage, which barrel lot, or which varietal. Obviously, it's easy to differentiate them when you are tasting, I don't know, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, or Cabernet Sauvignon versus Malbec and Merlot, Malbec and Petit Verdot. but normally we don't know what we are tasting. So that permits us to decide blindly what is the best blend possible. That's the beautiful exercise of making the Paradox blend.
Interesting. And so these wines all stay separately in their barrels until you make that final blend.
Sorry, say again?
All of these stay individually in their barrels until you make that final blend.
Yes, they spend 18 months, but again, it's a non-vintage. So sometimes we choose a 2017 lot of Merlot combined with a 2019 Cabernet Sauvignon. So it's also a non-vintage. So we always decide the best blend possible, not knowing from which vintage it's coming. So at the end, it's always a mix of different vintages.
Excellent. So minimum 18 months in oak.
At least, yes, minimum 18 months.
Fascinating. And where do you like to source your different varieties from? So where do you typically go for your Malbec? Where do you find is the best Merlot in the Uco Valley? Where do you like the Cabernet Franc?
That's the beauty of the Alandes concept. Before Alandes, I was attached to a single appellation in La Consulta for Alto Cedro and in Cafayate for Abras. But the Alandes concept permits us to travel along the Andes. So the 5 varietals come from along the Uco Valley, from different vineyards that we know very well. Every vineyard could be considered a designated vineyard or a single vineyard by itself. But specifically for this wine, the Petit Verdot comes from Vistaflores, the Cabernet Sauvignon from Vistaflores and from La Consulta, from El Cepillo, sorry, the Cabernet Franc from La Consulta and Vistaflores, the Malbec from Campo de los Andes and Chacades, and the Merlot from La Consulta.
Perfect. And can you tell us about El Cepillo? Because I think this is one of the really interesting developments in the UK in the Uco Valley with the development of the IG. So can you tell us what Pampa El Cepillo is and what you like about it as a wine region?
Well, Instagram doesn't allow us to share the screen or maps.
Not anymore.
Fernando, that is here. He will bring my maps from, if you don't mind, sorry for that. They're below my desk, the blue, thank you. I have some printed maps that I will bring.
Yeah. I can also, I have my book map here open. So
perfect.
We can also look briefly here. So we've got Pampa El Cepillo is this kind of designated area here.
Yes. Let me show you. I have a very old maps from the INTA. Sorry, 1 second. Don't get afraid. I'm not leaving the conversation.
No, it's okay.
I will bring.
I'll just keep drinking.
It's much bigger, but I will show it to you from my. Thank you, Fernando. This very old map, I found it in the INTA. It's drawn by hand.
Nice.
So here you can also see in colors between. Let me show you. Between La Consulta, that is that specific triangle, and that gold area or pink stamp that is El Cepillo. El Cepillo, it's a completely, that very old map it was the first determination of the areas based on the temperature difference. But if we start on the Uco Valley, you have the Tupungato in the north, split from Tunuyán by Las Tunas River, and then you have San Carlos on the very south here, that is the oldest county of the country, but La Consulta is on the very north. But if you see the map closer, you will see that the main formation close to the river, the Tunuyán River, it's La Consulta. So this is the alluvial formation determined by the Tunuyán River. And El Cepillo is a completely different formation, or it's a colluvial formation of two landscapes together. It's like putting two landscapes one above the other. The one in the bottom it's from sand and from chalkstone, and the one in the top is from sand. So this very unusual soil type or soil texture of sand and chalkstone, plus the exposure to the mountains that you don't have in La Consulta, but a few kilometers south. Our vineyard in El Cepillo is 12 kilometers south from Alto Cedro Winery. So the growing conditions are completely different. While this area is facing the northeast, that area is facing the northeast, El Cepillo is facing the southeast. So here is completely colder, the risk of frost is higher, and that's why the development of tempranillos was much higher in El Cepillo to fix the problem of the risk of frost using tempranillo or replacing the Malbecs with tempranillos. And in another map, if I find it here, no, it's not here. I will have printed in a big one, but don't worry.
I'll upload them. I'll upload them. If anyone's watching replay, I'll upload them online so that they can see them afterwards.
In that map, you can see how different is the El Cepillo as a formation. So it's not only about the exposure or the soil type, it's also about the slopes and how the vines are exposed to much harder growing conditions compared with La Consulta.
Excellent. And that's why it's called La Heladera, the fridge, because it's so cold.
I started using that name many years ago because they call it the cemetery or the fridge, because many growers always go to bankruptcy because they lose everything every year, or they have regular frost every 2 or 3 years. So it's a place that expresses the fruit in a completely different way from La Consulta.
Yeah, interesting. Super. Well, that is great to taste your Paradou blend red. And now we're going to move to a single variety, but a blend of regions. So this is your Gran Cabernet Franc, which is definitely one of the... Cabernet Franc is certainly one of the stars of the Uco Valley in Argentina in recent years. Can you tell me about why you wanted to focus on Cabernet Franc and what you like about Argentine Cabernet Franc versus, you know, your typical French Loire Cabernet Franc? How different is it?
Well, actually, I always fought against the Cabernet Franc trend because I love Cabernet Franc from the very beginning, but mostly as a blend. We started using and working with Cabernet Franc for our La Consulta Select in 2009. So I fall in love of that specific vineyard that permits us to reach a very light, elegant expression of Cabernet Franc instead of the big, rich, bold, muscular Cab Franc that it's more popular on the market. So personally, I always like the Loire Valley expression, that it's a colder expression, a lighter expression, a more elegant expression. So until I couldn't find a more fruit to develop this specific style, I never released a single varietal Cabernet Franc. Cabernet Franc it's something in between Cabernet Sauvignon and Malbec. It's like both worlds combined, both worlds together, the best of Cab Sauvignon and the best of Malbec. So it's something that especially from Argentina, the Cab Francs are getting more and more popular because people like to have the best of both varietals together.
Excellent. I mean, I think one of the reasons that Cabernet Franc is doing so well in Argentina is because it gives you that real spiciness that you don't get with many other of the classic varieties in Argentina. Mm-hmm. And this wine for me has that gorgeous kind of peppery, fine note all the way through to the end. And I love the freshness that you have in this wine. Can you tell me where you source it from? This one comes from 2 regions, doesn't it?
Yes, it's come from a vineyard close to, very up on the Vistaflores side, between Vistaflores and Los Chacales, and also from La Consulta. But you mentioned a key word that is freshness. This Cabernet Franc has a freshness, has the freshness as an asset, as something that permits us to differentiate our Cab Franc from other Cab Francs, because it's from the Alandes portfolio is the most limited production, the most expensive wine from the portfolio. People expect to find a very rich, muscular wine, and it's something completely different. It's a very light, gentle expression, completely unique, especially from these cool climate Cab Francs that are lovely in that part of the Uco Valley.
Yeah, I think it's a very elegant wine. I really enjoy this wine. I think it's a really good Cabernet Franc expression and very elegant and vibrant. Nice to drink. So why, this is single vintage each time?
Yes, here we don't need to combine different vintages. It's a very limited production. It's around 1,500 bottles and a few magnums. So we always do a very small fermentations, micro fermentations in small tanks, and it aged 18 months in French oak. So we don't have room or enough volume to combine different vintages, and it's not necessary here. We really have a very stable expression every vintage, and it's very enjoyable to hear. It's a good example how you can enjoy vintage variation.
Perfect, wonderful. Before we finish, I want to ask you, because I know that for you, sustainability in the vineyard and also your growers and people you work with is very important. So can you tell us a bit about the ethos of Karim Mussi Wines in terms of sustainability and working in the vineyard?
Well, it's a good point, because we start doing or being sustainable in a very spontaneous way, and not as or something specific of our winemaking, also of our understanding of life beyond our job, beyond our winemaking duties. So, especially on the farming where we start, we don't use any kind of fertilizer, chemical fertilizer. We do our own compost using the skins and the seeds every year that we compost every year and put on the vineyard. We don't use any kind of weed control. So it's all our vineyards. Only in La Consulta we manage 17 different vineyards. So are more than 23 blocks that need a lot of labor. It's very labor intense, all by humans, and we have only one tractor. So it takes a lot of effort to keep all those vineyards clean and properly managed. Also, all our wineries are gravity fed. Our carbon footprint is very low. We ferment everything with indigenous yeast. We don't use almost the cooling machine or the boiler, and our wines are we have no fining, no filtration. It's a very cold, stabilized by cold from La Consulta cold or the Uco Valley cold that extremely cold in the winter. So we have a very natural, spontaneous process. I always like to say that every wine that we make is just grape juice fermented, no additions, no nothing. It's a very simple winemaking process based on a very complex management of the vineyard and at the winery.
Excellent, wonderful. And that, that quality and attention to detail, I think you really notice in the wines. So congratulations. I absolutely adore drinking your Alandes profile. Before we finish, I know we're running out of time and you're busy with the harvest, but you're a big music lover. So I want to know, what music are you playing in the winery to keep you going through 2021?
Well, I don't know. I'm a very eclectic. I'm not the best DJ for my friends, because I like all kind of good music. So sometimes could be jazz, sometimes could be classical music, sometimes could be tango. I love tango. I love Argentinian folk music. I love rock from the 70s. I'm a big fan from the British or the UK invasion that changed everything in the rock and roll music during the 60s and the 70s. So I don't have a single gender or a single band. I think it's a big, messy playlist that everybody complains, but I enjoy a lot.
Well, that's the good thing about being the boss, is you can play what you like.
But I can say that normally it starts with Led Zeppelin and it finishes with Led Zeppelin.
Excellent.
I have a radio program many years ago when I was in college, and I was checking the list of music that we played for 3 years, and it was like that. My first program, I play Led Zeppelin and the Doors first, and 3 years later, I finished with Led Zeppelin and the Doors. So that would be two great bands that we can play anytime.
Excellent. Consistent.
That's
Fabulous.
my second name.
Karim, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time out and sharing some of your wines with us. And hope to see you soon. Good luck with the rest of the vintage.
Thank you, Amanda. I hope you can return to Argentina very soon. And let me send a big kiss to all your followers from your site. That they learn a lot from us thanks to you. So all the people around you that is learning from Argentina and South American wine, thank you very much.
Salud. Gracias, Karim.
Bye-bye, Amanda. Thank you.
Bye. Good luck with the vintage.